Hello, and welcome to Asian Provocation. I'm Ayoto, and today I'm excited to share with you my conversation with Dr. Thorsten Pattberg. He's the author of East-West Dichotomy and Shen. Now, just a little bit of heads up, we had some connection issues with our call, so that did impact our conversation a little bit. In any case, I still think that the discussions and the topics are very much relevant, and I hope that it will inspire you to pick up a copy of his book and read more about the Shen. Without further ado, please enjoy our conversation. I'm really pleased to meet you and to be introduced to you through Dr. Robert Beshara. I've been going through. I've got 7 of your books here. I've got 8.
Is that true? Wow!
Look at this. It's a whole section of my shelf now.
I appreciate.
So there's a lot to get through. It's probably one of the most exciting reads I've had in this year. So let's get started with it all. The first book that I was introduced to and I started reading was the East-West Dichotomy.
And you read that as well?
That was the first one. That's the only book that I don't have physically because I got the digital one.
Okay.
But that was my introduction, and I have to say, on first read, it was I thought I don't disagree with anything, but I thought, oh, this is it hit something. There was like a resistance, but the thing was, I thought, but what's the problem here? I don't disagree. Everything is I realized, like, oh, like, am I closeted about these ideas? Like, what is going on here?
Right. If I may interrupt you, yeah, the East-West dichotomy this is metaphysics, right? It's not real. It's just a theory, a concept that is out there in world history. And the East-West dichotomy, I have a copy here, I think. The older ones. No, not quite that one. That was actually published by the Foreign Language Press in Beijing. So it's a real publisher. They thought it might be exciting for Western readers to have this in English, right? Because everybody heard about the division between East and West. Yin and Yang, ebb and flood, poise and counterpoise. But to put it in a little booklet, and inform everybody about the cultural, psychological effects, demography, it's all in this little book, right? And this dichotomy exists since the Greeks versus the Persians. And now it has expanded all over the globe. It's the West and the East.
So you also, recently I was reading another book, and it was also discussing the problem between kind of dichotomy way of thinking versus what was the precise word, like a more of a tripart, or having a third, and that these two can also be in conflict. But in any case, just to stay on the East-West dichotomy first, even so, am I correct in noticing that even the publishers from China were having some questions around how this will be received?
Absolutely, of course. This is a concept that can be found in most books of cultures, right? And in academia, there's a thing, don't do this black and white thinking only. Reality has more nuances. We all know this, and I'm not denying that. But it's a matter of fact that this dichotomy exists in all our literature. It's always there. And we see this today even, right? In the news every day. There's the West, the Western narrative over the East, over Asia, right? Europe versus Asia, or America even versus Europe. You can make a dichotomy out of this, right? Dichotomy basically means there are incommensurability. They do not overlap really, the differences. That's what the East-West dichotomy stands for. There's no overlap. It's direct confrontation, the work with each other. It's a power continuum. It's like yin and yang. Sometimes one is overpowering the other, But then after a while, we have balance again. We have an equilibrium, so to speak. So it's black and white thinking. Yeah, it is. But there's some truth in it.
So from that book, I got into Shengren. And this for me was really a masterpiece because I, as I mentioned in the emails, that my mother, she's a Chinese teacher, and she gave me a good start and a foundation to a lot of these ideas. But I realized that for me, it was always segregated internally for me. But they are there. But so it depends on which language I'm operating in. And so what I really loved about this book was this gateway, or this bridging. At the same time, when I try to explain this book to other people, I say that it's trying to translate, but the whole book is a failure or a repetition on trying to explain why this is not working, why this is not the correct translation. Could you talk a bit about your description of the end of translation and where we're socially we're kind of in this world right now where we're having this difficulty despite having more globalization in our beliefs?
Right. The Shengren, this titular book, is the Shengren is the name of the Chinese sage, and it was most people have never heard about the Shengren if they are not from China, and the reason why is because we translate it. Our translators in the past for 400 years, they saw this word Shengren, and they translated it as a philosopher or saint or sage. Some other translations as well. That's why we don't know this word. And I'm saying don't translate it. You have to adopt this word into the English language, into the German language, and so on, to make it a loan word to the West. Now, this idea was not well received at all. I don't know why. I was in China. I was at Peking University. So I said this is clear finding. I read all these old books by the missionaries, the old translators, and I think I have a good grasp on the idea. What they were doing, what we were trying to achieve in China. They really wanted to translate China, okay? There's no doubt about that, because they did it differently in India. In India, we have many Indian concepts that were not translated, they were adapted. Words like Buddha or Bodhisattva, even Buddhism, right? These are words from India. Dharma, we all know Dharma or Karma. Avatar, they made movies with this. So we had a lot of Indian concepts, but Chinese concepts, we were reluctant to adopt them. That's the problem with the Shengren. So the idea was not well received at first, right? I struggled a little bit to spread the word, so to speak. So the Shengren is actually a doctoral dissertation, right? It's a new finding. Little bit of research, but I think I nailed it. I traced down the Germans and the Dutch, even the Latin translations, the French translations, mostly the English translations. And I nailed it because I found them all, most of them. And I know what they were thinking when they were translating, because they basically explained themselves. They were wanted to convert the Chinese into Christianity. That's what they wanted to achieve.
So it's definitely clear and even I feel like there's a bit of sympathy from my side, understanding the reluctance from Western academics and even the Western world in general. Yes. But I wonder if you notice from the Chinese side even, and maybe you have seen that also in Japan, the kind of even the resistance from the Asian side about, it seems to be like a two-step thing. Like the Western perspective on this kind of potential threat. But do you notice that even from the Asian side, like the way that, like how does the Chinese, and also now that you're in Japan, like is there also this kind of internalized resistance to actually take space and to speak about these things and to push for your similar ideas, because it's not very common, your ideas, even from, I have to say, from other Asian academics?
They have to deal with the past. I think basically most Chinese academics in China were trained in the West, or they have huge influences from the West. So our department at Peking University was really called the Department of Philosophy. It's written on the doors. And all these scholars, when they published in English, they used to call Confucianism a philosophy. Confucius is a philosopher. And the Shengren, they didn't mention him. If they mention him, then they write the word Shengren in brackets. And they straight out say it's a Christian saint or philosopher, something like that. Despite the fact that it can't be a philosopher. Philosophy is a Western thing. It's a Greek Hellenic, right? We all know the story. Plato and Socrates, and then went through Christianity into Europe, and then the English and the Germans, they produced some philosophers, the French, then the Americans, but no Chinese back then, right? So we know there can't be philosopher, but they still published all their works as if the Chinese Shengren were philosophers in the past. So if you now tell them, maybe you should rethink your translation and stop it. Stop translation for a moment. Just don't do it. These words are too important for China and for the world. If they think about this, they cancel their own work out. You understand? These are professors. They're doing it for 30, 40 years. And they can't just fall back on the Chinese concepts. They're over it. And also I remind everybody that, of course, China tried to, for political reason, try to outlaw Confucianism almost, right? During the core communist era, right? No religion, no superstition, no Confucianism, no Taoism. No, the Taoists are the worst. They have Shengren too in Taoism. So they try to not mention these things, right? But now, of course, with Xi Jinping era, it is coming back. I hope so much. Yeah, it's coming back. Maybe they will do it in the future, but right now they don't mention the Shengren that often, I'm afraid.
So I'm really impressed for your work and your position, because it seems that you to get to this point that you must have to create quite a lot of antagonism in the academic process. Has that been the case for you on both sides, perhaps in Germany, also in the US, in China, and now even in Japan? How do you do that, and what's that experience like?
I mean, to be frank, the Shengren, I lost everything, right? Immediately, my director, they were all from Harvard. This is another story. I wrote books about this, a Harvard connection, right? Peking University was co-founded by the Americans, right? 150 years ago. The Yenching Institute, Yenching scholars, it's all connected to Harvard. So a lot of important people from China, they are sent to Harvard and back. And my director was from Harvard. He hired me because I was at Harvard. He saw what I was doing. I was contradicting his own writings because of the Shengren. And he said, no. He said no. So, that was that at Peking University. And afterwards, I got in trouble with the professor in Hong Kong. People should know this. The West is exercising huge influences over Hong Kong into mainland China. We all know this. So the professors 20 years ago, they were all from Hong Kong, right? Trained in Hong Kong, partly Taiwan also. And they were very westernized. It's not bad. They were excellent scholars among them. But they're still very westernized, right? And if they hear there's something coming from mainland China, they won't like that. So there's a resistance even from the Chinese diaspora in the West and in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Also, not good news for me in that case. So the Shengren is now, it's like 10 years ago, right? 12. I went to Japan. They told me basically the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they were picking it up. I wrote one article. I published several articles on the Shengren in Asian newspapers. In over hundreds of them. It's not a few, really hundreds. And they picked it up and they wanted to launch a big project. We can talk about this later. It's really big. They wanted basically to recoup the lost translations. And Xi Jinping also heard it, the vice premier back then, that was Liu Yandong. That was one of the vice premiers of China. So they picked this idea up, right? and they made something out of it. They published, they contacted the Confucius Institutes, right? Told everybody, all the schools, all the universities in China, watch your translation. There's something going on, something fishy. Do not translate if not absolutely necessary, right? Stick to your own guns. This is how you expand China and the Chinese culture to the world. It's not bad. It's a good influence, I think. Yeah, but it didn't help me, right? Obviously. So I ended up in Japan, yeah. And I finished that chapter of it and I wrote other stuff, right? About China and the West. But the Schengen, it's past me. I left it behind.
For me, it had the effect of, as I mentioned, like there's a kind of parallel with Edward Said's work and the kind of criticism to Western Orientalists and what they've been doing and the kind of effects of that. I'm curious for you personally, how did you get into studying and learning Sanskrit and Chinese and many other languages? And can you explain perhaps the difference and the importance of between like polyglot linguist and just say language learning that people might think of?
Well, the difference between a polyglot and a language learner is basically, it used to be a polyglot is raised multilingual, I would say. Of course, if you learn a lot of languages later in life, you can always say you're a polyglot. But originally, we meant by that people who are grown up multilingual, right? So we have a lot more polyglots these days than in the past because we have lots of international people now. You speak Chinese, right?
Yes, that's Mandarin and Taiwanese or Hokkien.
But you are now
in
Germany. You're now in Germany, right? How is this going on? Is it working? The German language is difficult now.
It's I'm interested in people in kind of like what are typical developments like learning anything, right? Like what are some typical things that people go through? And I noticed some patterns when people have to learn German. And I think I'm hitting all of those points, you know, the frustration, the anger, the resentment, and also a lot of the internalized aspects of that. But another little thing I'll share is that I grew up in Australia, and actually the high school I went to is a Lutheran school. So they actually had German immersion for... That's right, Protestants. Wow, okay. Wow. So I didn't do the German immersion, but the school came with that ideology. So yeah, and how was that for you? Were you also raised as a polyglot? What was your parents' influence on you? Why did you do these studies?
No influence for my parents on that respect. Very different family, not at all into academia or so. It just was my own drive. You know, when I was young, I figured out I wanted to see the world. I traveled already within Europe, but I wanted to study abroad, not in Germany. And that's how it went, you know, from one post to the next, you know, just moved around. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Protestant school in Australia. That's amazing, right? How far the reaches of some cultures. Basically, the Protestants, Martin Luther, the reformer, the great reformer, he did great language work for the Germans, right? Because he refused the Latin Bible and he translated it into the German language. And he translated everything, right? Every important key terminology, language, speak patterns, idioms. He tried his best to use old German words. And that helped the German language prosper, and it helped later the German Empire. Yeah. So translation absolutely is king. It's very important. And but of course that was the past. You know, you said the polyglotism, right? Polyglots. We have a lot more polyglots these days. The original multilingual people in multilingual households grew up in 3 or 4 languages even. And then you have people who are learning it easily afterwards, and they expand their vocabularies, right? And this goes up. It basically has no limits, right? If you study linguism at any university, you will learn at least 10 languages, at least the basics. You're not going to speak all of them, and certainly not fluently. But you're learning the grammar structure, the ideas behind it, and then you realize that they're organized into language families, and then it makes it much easier to learn all of them, right? If you know the roots of some words, the Latin roots or the Greek roots, then you can suddenly read all the Germanic languages, right? The Germanic languages, they used a lot of Latin cores or roots, had their own Germanic languages. One of those were the Anglo-Saxon, the language, Anglo-Saxon, and they went up to Great Britain, today Great Britain. So the German language and the Anglo-Saxon language, English, they are one family, one language family. So they learn each other languages quite fast, I think. Right? Same with Latin. Yes, same with Latin languages, right? French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. You know, you can learn 4 of them at the same time, no problem. You will be able to read lots of it after only 1 year. No.
You have a daughter now, right? That is also growing up in this multilingual environment.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you think is? Do you see difficulties in this kind of experience? Because when I grew up, I also thought I saw that coming, but I was not living in it yet. But at first I thought, oh, this will be a great thing for the world and for people to understand more. But as time goes on, maybe we're just in one particular period, but I feel like it actually has increased antagonism amongst people and maybe even within people who embody different cultures. Do you see some of the downsides of mixing and linguistically within people?
I mean, it's hard to tell. It's always an individual case. I know you also you studied in Italy. Is that right? Is this correct?
Yeah, I also studied in Italy. Yeah, that's also a very different experience than living in Germany, and also language learning was very different.
Of course, yeah. Wow, you have some collection there. Australia, Protestant school, Italy, Germany, China. You lived in Japan as well, right? But that was later in life, no? Japan, the first time I went to Japan, I've been to Japan many times because my family is also, there's some Japanese connections, but I never really lived there full time. And you know, we also discussed a bit on the concept or the ideas of decolonialism, and some of the relations around that. And for me, how I arrived at this was, you know, again, as a little back introduction about the podcast itself, like it was because I was trying to explain to some Western friends about racism, about the experiences, and about colonialism. And there's so much resistance, so much disbelief, a lot of defenses. And for me, I realized that if it had not been that I lived in such contrasting places, I don't think I would believe it myself. But it was so drastic, the experience. It's easy to say, okay, you know, it's just my own experience. I have my personal bias. But it was just so interesting to see how extremely different I am treated in different environments. It was like day and night. And so let's say even between Italy and Germany, you know, in Germany, they would say a lot of things. And now I understand that this is just the same kind of cliche racism that I've experienced in different places. And of course, the racism can have different flavors, but they would say, oh, you know, this is just, you just need to assimilate. You need to, you know, learn this. You need to, then one day, maybe you will be treated correct because it's your problem. You did not learn correctly. But this was not the case at all when I was living in Italy. But I could see that they would treat other kinds of people much worse than me. I think, you know, of course, like the question of colorism and so forth. But this was very, very interesting and eye-opening for me. And so when I actually read books and theories about this,
it kind of comes about. Yeah, so these are the kind of drastic differences. But, I think of all of your books, that was the most provocative, perhaps, was the Menticide Manual.
All right.
And, I mean, this one was, I feel like you were really having fun and enjoying the full range, going beyond just theories and playing with a lot of different styles.
Right.
What was the reaction of this book compared to the other ones?
I don't know about that reaction. That was a different audience, and I don't sell much of those books, right? It is not a traditional publisher. I was having fun, as you said. The Menticide Manual is an instruction manual on some propaganda techniques, how to mess up somebody's brains. Some techniques well known, others not so well known to the general public. And then I tried to explain each of these techniques with a little story that is actually true. So all of it is true in some extent. It's quite scary. That's why I think the category should be horror. It's a horror anthology. Quite scary stuff, right? And I can write about this because I also travel to lots of countries, right? So there's some Japanese things and Chinese things and expats living in foreign countries, trying to adapt, as you said, which is sometimes almost impossible. But it's not just racism, it's also classism, right? If you talk about language and culture, if you can't speak a foreign language and you are in that country, you experience other kinds of discrimination, natural, but it's not against your race, but against your culture. You can't speak the language. You're an illiterate to them, right? And then, of course, you have the educational barriers, right? I imagine if you've seen a lot of different countries and you're reading books all the time, then you will have, it's much harder to make friends because you also have to find other friends who read a lot of books. No? So it gets harder and harder to make friends. That's true. It's true. Yeah. But about the languages, like
when you brought up Hong.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, please go.
No, I was just thinking because I'm staring at my onigiri. I have a Japanese onigiri here, right? This is a little rice bowl stuff.
And nice.
Yeah. And I recently read in a BBC report that onigiri and 22 other Japanese terms are now entering this year, 24, the Oxford Dictionary. Isn't that amazing? So they selected 23 new Japanese words that are going into the English language proper. And that's amazing. And I think this is a wonderful way for foreigners in any country. You don't necessarily have to learn the language properly. Like you can never do it anyway in adult age. It's far too difficult. It takes you years and years. But at least, some words you will always pick up. They always strike your mind, and you should not forget them. And these are the cultural key terminologies, as I like to call them, right? Like onigiri or bento or futon or some Japanese words, sumo, kami, the little ghosts. And once you hear them, you not forget them. And I don't know any foreigner who is translating them at all. They just adopt these Chinese loan words. And that is what you will probably also experience in Germany, right? You don't speak German every day, but there are some words that are just intriguing, German words, I mean, and you try to use them maybe in your English writing later, who knows?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this question of translation, there's so many complexities. Right now, I'm also studying a lot of psychoanalysis, and it's also very peculiar that, as an example, that and Freud is a very interesting character in his works because with his translation that it ended up that in Germany it's not as popular as perhaps in the Anglo world in this later period, since the translation some would say may be clarified for a lot of the newer audiences and also external to say psychology department. And so I've been picking up a lot of German words through my interest in Freud, but also through the way of Fanon. and so there's a kind of the way that language updates itself with new ideologies, and also the defense mechanism around this. Because what I wanted to bring up before was when we discussed about Hong Kong, was recently at a dinner, and I was there with Swedish and Spanish colleagues, and I brought up this question of Hong Kong, and I wanted to discuss specifically that I was not really discussing Hong Kong or even China for that matter, but specifically about the Western people's perception and their. It sounds like people talking about football, like why do you support red? Do you support blue? Do you support this team? Do you support that team? But was not really discussing what is happening about the protest in Hong Kong recently, what is happening with China. But there seems to be this inability to be aware of like, why do you support Hong Kong? And what is behind that intention, and also all the relations to connections to colonialism and so forth. But even if people don't know the history, they are very invested in perpetuating their views of, and I wonder if that comes enclosed within the language itself. Like why do you support that so much, even though you didn't read anything about Hong Kong, you have no idea about the history and the connection. That was just something that really came to mind just now about Hong Kong.
Yeah, right. And of course, it's also the same problem. Those who read the least are the loudest. No? It's always like this. As soon as the people have some form of lot of reading, background information, and they know the different languages, and so they're much more reluctant to make aggressive statements or whatever, you know. And so those who have no education are the loudest. That's my experience. I mean, I remember back then the demonstration in Hong Kong, the wild protests. You know, some people didn't even know what they were protesting all about. You know, they just wanted to join the fun, and this is dangerous now in politics. Yeah, anyway, yeah. It's an educational thing. I bet many of these people, they don't speak Cantonese or Chinese or Mandarin, I mean.
No, of course not.
Yeah. See, it's a big problem.
That brings to what I actually wanted to start this conversation in the first place, and just to reintroduce it here, that to my surprise, I have this one friend, Fabian, and I hope he will make it this far and watch this, that he told me in Germany a few years ago, and as politics gets more accessible online and people can go and do like certain surveys, and you can say, okay, what policies do you stand behind, and then they spit out like a candidate for you or a party that you could support. And he was surprised to find himself that the results said that he is extreme right-wing. And he didn't change his perspective, but he was shocked to understand, and perhaps having this cognitive dissonance about his view and himself, and also the signifier of extreme right wing and what that means. And one thing that you wrote that, and again, it's one of those things that your books has this effect on me, that it's, and as Zizek has pointed out, what is the category of things that I didn't know that I know. And one of the things that you said was perhaps maybe one of the more provocative ones, about the question of left wing versus right wing, and how that changes historically. And it becomes this idea that right wing is somehow, it brings a lot of negative connotations. I mean, on one level, I didn't want to talk about Trump, but here we are. But this question of right wing and left wing, where do you stand? How do you understand this? I'm having already trouble trying to formulate my question around it. I feel so sensitive around this question of left versus right.
You mentioned Zizek, right? Slavoj Zizek, like the mainstream philosopher, ne?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And the German Fabian, I don't know who is that. Is it like an activist or something?
Sorry, I'm losing the connection a bit. Can you say that again?
You mentioned the German Fabian. Is this an activist? Because you mentioned the politics. Is it an activist who got in trouble?
No,
in Germany?
he's far from an activist. He is not an intellectual at all. Not interested in any of these things. I bring him up often, and I think about him a lot because as somebody that supposedly has very right-wing political views, is very conservative fiscally, and is not interested in ideas of liberal democracy or theory or any of those things. Is a very kind of classic libertarian, perhaps in some ways. Yeah. I actually have the most ability to actually influence and have him really think about what I'm saying, as opposed to frequently, left, well-meaning whites who, believe, in supposedly equality, into Black Lives Matter and all these things. But then there are so many kind of unconscious racism, unconscious bias, and it with them, it's actually almost impossible to have a conversation, or impossible to bring to have understanding of what I'm saying, as opposed to Fabian, who is not an activist, who's not in any of these things, and these days will be probably quite under attack for the classic like cis white man position. Right. Yet it shocked me after years of hanging out with him that I realized that this whole time he was listening, that he's been processing. It's difficult for him to confront, but I feel that I'm actually making the most dialogue with this man as opposed to a lot of the classic left-wing people. So when you wrote about this question of right-wing, right versus left, and how that develops, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Well, generally it swings. People are making transformation. They don't always stay left-wing, and they don't always stay right-wing. They go through life and then go for one or the other. And at the moment in Europe, we all know this, the right wing is under attack, right? So he will not have a good time in Germany right now, during the past 10 years almost, now. And it's getting worse, I heard.
He moved to Portugal.
Oh, that's a good choice, yeah. I mean, like, as a foreigner in Germany, you will probably have a blast. It's much easier. You get away with, if you break the rules, who cares, and they like foreigners. They have an open border policy. They might try to make it politically correct for everybody. But the native Germans, they are prosecuted for just speaking their mind online, right? I know a lot of people who landed in jail or got raided or lost their jobs. It's terrible. I don't know what's happening.
The internet connection is getting worse, but anyway, the recording will be done and sent later. But just so you know, I'm having some delays from your side.
I also have some delays, no problem.
So
no, it's long distance. It's the other side of the world, right? Technology is amazing.
Totally. So, do you think in today's landscape you would be able to produce the Sungren?
Yeah, as a proper publication with, for instance, a Chinese publisher, no, it's not going to be translated. It just stays there. I'm not getting it published. There's no way. I mean, it's published, right? I have it here, right? This book, right? This is one of those.
Yeah.
But apart from that, it will not be. It will take a long time. I'm sure of it. It's not going to be published.
How has it been to also discuss this with your colleagues in Germany? Because I noticed also quite a lot of heavy criticisms that you have from, online. And in fact, when I researched about you at the beginning, it felt like a very taboo subject, and just your identity and your the immediate kind of quick Google research. But is this something that is ongoing? How do you deal with this?
It's too complicated. It's too long a story. It started in China. It started when I wanted to visit the United States. I got pulled aside on the airport. I got this quadruple SSSS, special they take you to a special room and they search all your stuff and they say, well, I'm from Peking University, but I'm also German, but I also German from Peking University who goes to Harvard. And it started with this. And then some of my websites, they broke down. I got no traffic at all. And I later called it the hell ban. I was completely banned. And it probably has something to do with the Google people who also hung around at the same time in Beijing, in Wudaokou area, right? Where Peking University is located, basically. And we know these people, you know. They were rejected by the Chinese government, but they were still there. People think, Google was not operating in China, right? Because of censorship rules they don't want to apply, you know. They're strong Americans, they will not do censorship for China. But in reality, the Google headquarters were always there, right? They operate. They just do other things. Instead of search engine, they try to, you know, do something with the internet. And one of the things they did was, they were censoring people now. They're censoring the Chinese professors, the Chinese knowledge bases, everything. I mean, if you open Google today, any topic, on any topic, you type into search, you will never see a Chinese, ever. Also no Indian, right? Or Russian, right? No, it doesn't exist. You only see Western people now. So what happened to this 1.3 billion Chinese and Indians, also over 1 billion, and Russians? You never see them. They don't exist on the internet now. Think about it. And they can do this with everybody. And my website was among them. 1 week to another, I had no traffic at all. And then I just basically, went bankrupt with the websites. 2 of them. Then my search results started to disappear. I mentioned earlier, I published over 100 articles about the Shen in Asian newspapers. And they disappeared, right? I couldn't find them. They were never shown to anybody. And it went on and on. It's like you getting blacklisted. It's serious. It's very serious. I go with Noam Chomsky. I later met him, you know, in MIT, Noam Chomsky. We talked about this in a small session because he always got censored in the past. And he reiterated one of his theses. He said very early in his career, but it's still true. He said censorship is kind of a form of torture. And I totally agree. It's really torture if you see this in real life. So of the thousands of professors we have at Peking University, Tsinghua universities, they were completely obliterated from the internet. And instead, Google, that owns YouTube also, by the way, right? Talking about videos, they helped Western content creators and dropped all the Asians, right? They just dropped them, right? The Asians, they're in their cage, right? They can produce content, but back in China, but it will never shown to the rest of the world, something like that. And this is real. I'm not making this up. This is real. That's what they're doing. Censorship on a massive scale, global
I think
scale.
I really appreciate the reminder of torture as a concept, because I've been through something similar too, and then just so people when they watch this, because we'll have the high quality, but right now, I mean, this is how the paranoia seeds start, because right now I'm having quite a difficulty. I'm catching every other word, but I still can string together what you were saying.
Okay.
But I know about the room at immigration. I've been through there as well, and a few years ago, also how I started to. But this is also the funny thing about censorship, that the more sometimes certain people, like maybe myself, the more one is repressed or stopped to ask something, that sometimes it creates more desire and curiosity.
Yeah.
And for me, I went through this experience where, and people still don't believe me, that on Instagram, that when I was posting, I wrote a small essay, and I don't consider myself in a kind of essayist classical sense, academic in that sense, but I understood. I wrote a piece about something about Louis Vuitton, and it was not even about them. I brought in the attention of it, and I brought in the kind of Orientalist aspect. Next thing you know, my account was so banned that I've never seen this level of ban before. And even somebody who works at Instagram, they were shocked to find that. And then a bit later on, my bank account was also frozen.
Wow.
And this was just so crazy. And then when I called up the bank, they were even the people there were shocked. And I discovered that I was put in this very special category, the worst category. You know, it's like terrorist, pedophile, like all these random things. And they keep reminding me that I have signed a waiver saying that to get an account there, I have to accept that there could be the possibility that I could be banned like this for life, and that they will never explain to me the reason behind it.
Yeah.
And when I try to explain to people, and in the US, I find it very ironic that they are so afraid and criticizing and saying about in China the what did they call it, when you have the social points and that you could be punished for this. And I said, yes, of course that's terrible, but you realize that in a social credit score, right? But in the West, in US, it's already happening, but you just have a different name for these things. But people are unable to accept this reality.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hard times. Always censorship.
But and now in Japan, how is it for you there? Like, how is your experience there, and what are you working on in Japan? If you are able to speak about that, how is your experience with this period of Japan? Because it's also a very interesting development.
Yeah, Japan. I mean, I'm in Tokyo, right? Tokyo never dies. Whatever happened in Japan, Tokyo will be fine. You know, the culture is here. You have convenience, but the rest of Japan is actually they have population problems, right? The demography, fewer and fewer people. But here, Tokyo, we are all right. It opened up. We have lots of tourists, lots of foreigners, so lots of interactions with new people and lots of inspiration. As a writer, it's perfect, no? I got a lot of inspiration. I can write until I drop dead. So this is a good thing. I can work from anywhere in the world. Like you yourself, right? You're in Berlin, you're fine.
And you mentioned that Sungren, and because you mentioned that Sungren, this is, in fact, this is the work that I feel like I'm speaking to a past Dr. Pattberg. So right now, like in terms of writing, what is engaging you in your interest?
Right now, I'm writing more books, and I have given up on finding a traditional publisher, and I'll tell you why. I did traditional publishing in the past, right? I mentioned the East-West Dichotomy was published with a state publisher. I have a novel published in Germany with a real publisher. Another book also. The Knowledge is a Polyglot was with a Hanban, with a Ministry of, what's the name? Ministry of, it belongs to the Ministry of Education. It's basically language training for foreigners, Chinese language for foreigners. Doiwai Hanyu, published with them. You know the work you have to put in it. They're censoring everything. They turn every phrase you use. You know, could it be expressed differently? Political correctness. I'm not doing this. I'm going full in now. I feel I have so much experience. I was 2 years here in Japan at Todai, Tokyo University. That was a blast. I loved it. Really good stuff. Lots of inspiration, lots of people, very, very interesting people everywhere, right? And they're also censored. They're also not censored. It's not really shadow ban. How to explain it? I think the Japanese professors here, I'm talking about professors. They have two personas. They have one academic persona where they have to play by the rules of the academia, which is very American here in Japan for historic reasons, very Americanized. And then they have a different persona where they pursue their own research. Still they do. And I love this, right? But it's hard for them to get published, and great ideas. In terms of decolonialization, they have ideas of, making Asian history, world history again, Not necessarily by inserting Asian keywords into history, but by looking at world history and finding out what went wrong, what was falsely reported by Western historians, right? And it's a big movement. And I sometimes have the feeling I'm in the right place, here in Asia.
I think that's a good place to cut this first interview with you, I would love to speak to you again and to know more about your current self-publication journey. Is there a place that I can direct people to follow you up on? I know that you have a YouTube account, but what is the best way that you're interacting with people in your works now?
I'm not using my accounts. I have a Twitter account and I just barely get followers. My YouTube accounts, they're mostly frozen. Nothing is happening there. And my Substack is now behind the paywall. I get reported so many times for every article. This is the topic maybe for another discussion.
Wow.
Right? These platforms, social media platforms. People have to be careful. I'm always saying people, you don't find internet information now on the internet. It's impossible, right? It goes back to the university. It becomes secret knowledge. What you hear and find for free on the internet, don't trust it. It's getting serious now, right? Anyway, you can just find me Pattberg, and if you want, try to get hold of one of the books. I think this is the best way. They're still on Amazon. Can you believe it? They're still there.
All right.
On Amazon.
The internet is getting worse and worse. I'm not sure if this is the paranoia. Like, what is happening here?
No, it's not. Sorry, it's not an evil plan. I'm saying, like, the universities, they are the gatekeeper of knowledge, right? And they're still there. Have you seen university closing? No. They're back on the stage and they're trying to gatekeep their knowledge again, right? They don't give their knowledge out to the world. It's over.
Right.
So what you see, many YouTubers who commenting on anything, right? They're trying to explain Chinese culture to you. What they're doing is they're doxing from the internet, but they don't have internal knowledge anymore, you know? Because if they would work at the university, they couldn't be talking freely about it, right? You cannot talk about your employer's little secrets if the employer is a university.